July 30th, Dr. Frank Turek.
When others won't stand for truth, stand alone. As a paid business consultant, Frank Turek understood what tolerance in the workplace should look like. He consistently interacted with people of all orientations and political persuasions, was fair-minded, cordial, and professional in every way. He treated people well and respected their rights to their personal opinions, and he rusted the companies he worked for to afford him the same respect. He was a free man after all, free to hold a personal opinion in America without the risk of losing his job. Unfortunately, Frank was wrong. In 2008 and again in 2010, Frank had done leadership training for managers at a well-known company. He was a gifted and dynamic speaker. Employees looked forward to the privilege of sitting under his leadership. One of the trainees Googled Frank and complained to Human Resources. Frank had published a book titled Correct, Not Politically Correct: How Same-Sex Marriages Hurt Everyone. As a result, that individual felt Frank needed to be fired. Suddenly, the dynamo consultant who had exercised his right to think and publish his own thoughts became a political pariah the company couldn't tolerate. Since Frank didn't live up to the company's values, the Googler insisted he can't work here. Frank alerted the manager, who had helped get him hired, and explained that trouble was brewing. The manager assured him, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." The manager showed up at one of Frank's training sessions, long enough to hear a participant tell Frank it was the best session she ever took. Afterwards, Frank was escorted to a separate conference room. The news wasn't good. "I don't know how to tell you this," the manager said, his eyes tearing up. "Frank, I have to fire you." "You have to fire me? Why?" "Because you wrote that book about same-sex marriage, and the HR director doesn't think your views line up to our company's values. You need to go." Even the liberal-minded workers thought Frank was being treated unfairly and wanted to be billed for the rest of the course he'd been fired from teaching. Frank decided to go public with the injustice, not just for himself, but for conservative values in general. 2 days before he did, he got another call. This one was from an HR representative at a nationally known bank where he had presented. The rep informed Frank someone had just Googled his name and found out he wrote a book against same-sex marriage. "Yep, it happened again. We're going in a different direction. You can't work here," the caller stated. 2 days later, Frank went public about his firings and the intolerance shown towards his conservative values. He became a voice for the National Organization for Marriage, NOM, and the Marriage Anti-Defamation Alliance. Not surprisingly, some people scoffed at the idea that conservatives needed protection that wasn't already in place. Yet both companies that fired Frank eventually promised not to discriminate against those who opposed same-sex marriages. As it turns out, Frank's voice did matter. Proverbs 24:10 says, "If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small." Are you willing to let your voice be heard? When others won't stand for truth, stand alone.
Fellas, this is Justin Brown. Once again, Lieutenant with Aurora Fire Rescue out of Aurora, Colorado. And today is July 30th. And I just heard the story of Frank Turek. What stood out to me about Frank Turek was his perseverance under persecution. If we can remember back to the verse in Romans 8:28, and we know that God works all things for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. I feel that Frank Turek displayed this in that he knew, even under persecution, that he wasn't going to sacrifice or compromise his integrity on what he believed. He ended up losing 2 different jobs in the process of his persecution. But once again, God worked in mysterious ways by honoring his intolerance towards the secular world and giving him the opportunity to keep his voice even though he was standing alone in his persecution. God never left his side. I challenge you, you will be, as Christian men, taken through times of persecution. Does that mean we fall over, roll over, and just give up? No, we serve a mighty God. We serve a God who will not leave our side. We serve a God who says, in all things, he will work for his good. Whether it be negative, positive, whatever, we need to realize and hold on to the faith and the hope that God will prevail. He will fight our battles. So my challenge to you is to continually hold that faith in check. Stand up, even when you feel like you're alone, to the masses that may be around you. I promise you, you're not alone. God will prevail. God will have the last say, the final say. We know how it's going to end. Keep the faith. Thank you.